Welcome back to my 350 members of my group. It is Friday, the 27th day of June 2025. Today, I want to say a little bit about the just completed, for this stage anyway, Israel versus Iran war. The result of this 12-day war was that Israel has failed in its objective, which means Iran has actually won the conflict. The objective, for those that do not know, it had nothing to do about nuclear weapons whatsoever. The objective was to replace the Ayatollah Khamenei and his mullahs in Iran with a subservient, Western orientated government in the form of the resurrection of the Pahlavi dynasty in the form of the son of the late Shah who was tossed out on his ear in 1979. We know this because the Israelis would have given a code name for this operation. It was going to be called Operation Rising Lion. Now, they will say that that is a reference to a biblical passage in the Bible, of course. Put that aside. If one knows the flags of Iran, it will have green, it'll have white, it'll have red, and it'll have a symbol in the center today. But when the Shah of Iran was in power before he was toppled in 1979, the symbol at the center of the flag was actually a lion with a rising sun at its rear, and that was the symbol of the Pahlavi dynasty. And that is why the operation was going to be called Operation Rising Lion, because they intended to rise up the line and restore the Shah's son to power. And he, of course, would do exactly what the Western governments would tell him to do. That was the objective, not actually the nuclear weapons at all. That was just an excuse from day one. That excuse now has been used for the past approximately 40 years. Each and every time it's the same old story. Iran is within months of developing nuclear weapons. Iran is within days, within weeks, it's within hours, it's within minutes. But it never came to pass. In March 2025, the intelligence services, under the command of the Secretary, of course, the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, she will have all the reports from the 20 plus odd agencies, and she will speak before Congress saying that, in their estimation, Iran had no ability to make nuclear weapons in the foreseeable future. And indeed, some people say they have no intention of making nuclear weapons at all. Be that as it may, that was used as the excuse. When the war began, it was a massive attack, a surprise attack by the Israeli forces. I believe they had something like 250 planes or whatever. But the bottom line is they hit them with everything they got in their arsenal in a surprise attack, killing many people, obliterating many commanders, killing many scientists, and knocking out facilities and whatever. What resulted then was some days of back and forth. To their surprise, of course, the Iranians were able to send many missiles over to Israel. Most likely, they'll be sending some of their least effective missiles because in shooting down a missile, you've got to expend one of your own defensive missiles to go up and shoot it down. The defending power, of course, will be using their most advanced missiles at the initial stages because everything is set out to be that way. So the advantage falls to the attacker as long as they have enough and a large quantity of missiles to outlast the defending forces. That, of course, was going to happen within 2 weeks. Then we saw the United States rushing some reinforcing arms and missiles to Israel. But the bottom line was the advantage was swung to the Iranians from that point on. I made an earlier video saying at day 5 that if Iran could last for 1 week, then the advantage would be to Iran. And sure enough, they did last 1 week, and it was not looking good whatsoever for Israel. More missiles was getting in, and they were seeing their position being weakened. Now, of interest during that first 5 days, when some electrical power facilities in Israel have been damaged, Egypt and Jordan, who would not have an excess of electricity capacity themselves, will divert some of their electricity to Israel to actually save their, well, I won't say save their bacon because bacon is not very popular over there, but anyway, to save their hide. That is very interesting because it shows that the Arab Muslims hate the Persian Shia Muslims even more than they pretend to hate the Jewish people in Israel. Put that in your pipe and smoke it. Now, the Israelis, of course, would have hoped that the Iranians would be foolish enough to hit some missiles and inflict serious casualties on the United States forces, and that would bring the US into the war in a serious situation. They were also hoping, of course, that the Iranian regime would collapse, and we would have seen a lot of propaganda saying Khamenei is on his way to Moscow and this, that, and the other, but that was all phony baloney. The regime survived. At that stage, then the Israelis had a problem, and the United States had a problem as well, because the United States could not seem to be defeated in this effort, because that would be the end of the Western influence indeed. So it was decided by somebody anyway that the US would drop severe bunker busters onto the Iranian facilities. Now, I have studied myself a little, but I'm not an expert on this, but I will watch somebody that would be indeed an expert, and that is a professor at MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, who put out a video explaining how these large 30,000 pounds would not be capable of penetrating possibly 800 meters into rock. At the very, very most, it would be capable of getting down 200 meters. But depending on the angle, depending on a lot of things, depending on defensive measures, the bottom line is he concluded that these bunker buses was not capable of doing the job. I would suspect he is correct in that assertion. You also must ask yourself, if these nuclear facilities were bombed and destroyed, the 400 kilograms or whatever it is of enriched uranium would it not escape into the atmosphere? We've had no reports of any radiation whatsoever, and indeed, we can only conclude that the whereabouts of the 400 kilograms of uranium, that's anybody's guess. But that was the end of that. Now, the next thing that happened of note was the Iranians will have to strike back at the US. They will have done exactly similar to what they've done before attacking Israel. They will attack a Qatar base of the US military. Needless to say, that base was totally evacuated 2 days prior to that. They will lob those missiles into an empty base and nobody gets killed and a little bit of damage is done. And that is saving face. If the Iranians were seriously intending to have a war with the United States, which is not in their best interest to do, obviously, because they could be turned into glass. If they were serious, they would just lob some missiles onto the aircraft carrier that was sent over there. There was 3 sent over there. Number 3 was the Nimitz. That's a big one. They're all big. But anyway, these big aircraft carriers with a crew of 5,500 personnel, in modern times against modern missiles, they are actually sitting ducks and they could be destroyed as well. Now, that is the summation of the war over 12 days. The bottom line is Israel failed. Khamenei is still alive. The mullahs are still in existence. They have actually won this war. Now, what that means going future has very big, complicated, big issues indeed, and I will make a little bit of a different video about that. But that is the war wrapped up in 10 minutes. Took 10 days. The regime survived, and don't believe any of the propaganda because that is it in a nutshell. Thank you very much for watching.